Hi, it's Reed from Blue Bear Quilts. Would you like to make a fun, easy project for spring? Well, this is the Bunny Hop Table Runner, and the pattern also makes 4 placemats. It's made with QT's new fabric line called Cottontails. So I'll show you some close-ups of the beautiful panel bunnies that are part of the fabric and the beautiful yellow, green, and red mosaics. Now let me show you what one of the table runners looks like. So this is one of the table runners, and the pattern makes 4 table runners. So follow along and we'll get started making the Bunny Hop Table Runner and 4 placemats. So in order to get started making the Bunny Hop Table Runner and 4 placemats, we of course are going to need the pattern from Blue Bear Quilts, and it does make a finished table runner that's 18 by 22 and 4 finished placemats that are 14 by 22. So what do we need to make this? Well, the pattern. We're also going to need this beautiful fabric from QT Fabrics. It's called Cottontails. It's one of their new lines, and this is a perfect project for this spring. So this is a panel fabric, and I'll show you a little bit more of this in just a bit. And these are the coordinating fabrics that I'm going to be using with the panel in order to make the table runner and placemats. So there are these beautiful mosaics in yellow, green, red. This is going to be a beautiful background fabric, and then this is going to make a gorgeous border that coordinates with all these fabrics. And then I'm going to incorporate these cute little bunny pictures into my backing, and then this beautiful tan fabric is going to be the binding. So what else do we need? Well, you're going to need a straight edge ruler, and you're going to need a rotary cutter, and probably some pins will come in handy along with your sewing machine and thread. Now in the pattern, it does give rotary cutting instructions so that you can just cut the pieces out in order to make the flying geese units that are part of this table runner and placemats. But inside it also gives you instructions for if you have the Studio 180 wing clipper ruler, which is this, you can follow the directions that come with this ruler to make the various size flying geese units that are in this table runner. And so that's what I'm going to be doing in this video, is I'm going to be using the Studio 180 wing clipper in order to make the various flying geese. So let me show you a little bit more of the pictures that are on this beautiful panel. So we have all these cute rabbits or bunnies or hares or whatever you call them, and they're separated by this beautiful fabric in between that could be incorporated into something. I may try to incorporate that into my backing as well. But aren't these bunnies just the cutest? And they appear to be like patchwork bunnies, maybe like some applique or curved piecing. But so many beautiful rabbits on this panel. And I'm going to be making both the table runner and the 4 placemats. And so that will use a total of 7 of these different bunny pictures. And on the whole panel there's a total of 12. So I'll be using 7 out of the 12. So stay tuned and we'll get started making this table runner and placemats. So in order to make the flying geese units that are in the table runner and 4 placemats for the yellow, we can tell from the pattern that they're going to be finished at 2 by 4, which means they'll be unfinished at 2.5 by 4.5. So we go to the wing clipper instructions, and it tells you like the cutting chart of cutting squares to make these flying geese units. So for a 2 by 4 finished, which is 2.5 by 4.5 unfinished, we need a 5.5 inch square, which is going to be the goose part of the block. And then we need 3-inch smaller squares that are going to be the sky part of the block. So here you can see I've cut out the larger square and the smaller square, excuse me, and then you lay these on top of each other like this, and you're supposed to scooch these smaller squares so that there's just a little tiny bit of the background square showing. So they get laid on top of each other like that. And then we're going to need to draw a line through the middle of those two. So you can see I've done that on this one. So I've drawn a line like that through both pieces. So I just laid my ruler on here, and you can use anything to do this. You can use a pencil or a pen because that line is going to get cut and it's not going to show. So I drew the line, and then once you've drawn the line, you need to sew 1/4 inch on either side of the line. And I have a foot on my machine that is 1/4 inch away from the needle, and so I just ride that edge of that foot along this line, which will put a stitching line over there 1/4 inch away, and then I turn it around and go back the other direction, and again ride that marking on my foot, which is 1/4 inch away from the needle, along that line, and it puts another stitching line 1/4 inch away from that line. And so there you can see that I have the stitching on either side of the lines. I have pins in place holding the smaller piece of fabric in place so that it doesn't shift on me. And once you've done that, you're going to take and cut along that black line and cut these two pieces in half, right like that. And if it's not exact, like you can see I'm not exactly on the line there, you're okay, because these pieces are going to be slightly oversized, and that will help. So now you take the pins out at this point, and we end up with 2 units that look like this. And we're going to want to flip these up and press them. And so I'm going to take and do that, and then I'll be right back and show you how we add the next piece. So now I've pressed those 2 little corners that were like this. There were 2 of these, and on this particular one I've pressed it up so that it kind of looks like a heart. And then you take another one of these small squares and you put it down here on the bottom like this with right sides together. And again, you want just a couple of threads on the outside of that square. And when you do that, you take and you mark it again with another line, and you sew again on either side 1/4 inch away from the line. And then once we've done that, we're going to cut it apart again. So I'm going to take and put the ruler on here and cut this apart. And we then end up with 2 pieces that look like this. And when we press them, they're going to look like flying geese units. So here are 2 that have been pressed, and that's what they look like. So you can see from our 2 large squares and 8 small squares, we're going to end up with a total of 8 of these flying geese units. So this is really a quick way of making these. So the next stage is we have to trim these up. They're slightly oversized. So there's a mark on here that says 2.5 and one that says 4.5. And so we're going to take and put that in here so that the 2.5 line is contained within and the 4.5 line is contained within. And then we look for this little point right here, and we want that to be in the middle of that point. So basically like that, and then we take this line here and line it up with that, and that line's lined up with that, so our 4.5 line is there. and our fabric is clearly under that, and our 2.5 inch line is there. So you can see we still will have more to trim off after we make these first 2 trims. So we're going to trim up this top side, and we're going to trim off that side. And then what we're going to do is take and rotate this 180 degrees. And now we're going to look for the 2.5 inch line and the 4.5 inch line, and we're going to put those right where we previously cut, and now we're going to look to line up this in the middle of that. And so that looks pretty good. But primarily pay attention to these outside lines. You want them to be on the 2.5 and the 4.5. And if this other section isn't quite right, it's close enough. So now we're going to trim up this side and trim up this side. And then there we have a perfectly trimmed flying geese unit, and that's the amount of waste that we have. So very, very little waste. So I'll trim one more of these up for you. So again, we're going to lay it like this, and I'm left-handed, so if you're right-handed, you're going to do everything like the exact opposite. And a lot of times the instructions for these Studio 180 rulers will tell how to do it for left and right-handed people. So again, I'm looking for the 2.5 inch line and the 4.5 inch line, because that's what these units are when they're unfinished. And when they're finished or sewn into the quilt, then they're going to be 2x4 bits. So for right now, they're going to be 2.5 by 4.5. So again, we're looking for this line and want to make sure that's in the seam, and this little line should be in the seam. We're going to put that down like that. And again, we have enough fabric going all the way around. So we're going to trim these first 2 sides here. Very little waste. And then we'll trim this side up here. Okay. And then we're going to take and rotate this 180 degrees. We don't even have to rotate our ruler. And again, we're looking for the 2.5 inch line and the 4.5 inch line that are now going to line up right with our cut edges. And then we want this line to be in the seam line. It looks like it's just about perfect on this particular unit. So we did really well with this one, and now we're going to trim the other 2 sides. And so there we go. There's 2 of the units. And so again, from those 2 larger squares and 8 smaller squares, we end up with 8 flying geese units. Pretty amazing, huh? So I'm going to keep trimming these up, and then we'll start working on the medium-sized flying geese unit next. So there you have it. There are the 8 yellow flying geese units that are necessary to make the table runner and 4 placemats. But there is one more step in order to get these flying geese units ready to go into the block, and we call it the triangle block in the pattern. And they need to have rectangles sewn on either side. So you basically just take one of these squares. Oh, and by the way, this was the amount of waste that I got from trimming up those. So you can see there's very little waste, which is one of the reasons I love using those Studio 180 rulers. So now in order to get this unit ready to go into the triangle block, we have to take and put a background rectangle on either side of these flying geese units. And when we do that, they end up like this. Once we have the yellow flying geese units made, there are rectangles that get added to each side, and I've done that on all of the yellow flying geese units. So now we need to make green and red flying geese units, and the process is the same way of taking those squares and putting the right size square tan pieces on top, and now we're at the stage where I've cut it in half and I'm putting that extra piece on. And we're also doing that, and notice that this is a little bit larger than the yellow pieces, and then we get even larger for the red pieces. And I was showing you how to trim up the yellow pieces. I actually had the triangle facing the wrong direction. For the wing clipper ruler, I had it pointing to the left, and then I took the ruler and put it on there and made sure that the well, in this case it would be the 3.5 by 6.5 inch line were within the fabric, and then this little crisscross triangle was in the upper left hand corner, but it actually should be that the triangle is facing to the right. And the ruler gets laid down the same way. And again, we make sure that the 3.5 by 6.5 inch lines are contained within the fabric. And then you can see those two black lines that are running along the seam lines. You want them to basically be right on top of the seam lines, and you want to make sure that you still have fabric on the other side of your 3.5 and 6.5 inch lines. So it's important to have those lines on the seams, but mainly pay attention to the 3.5 by 6.5 inch line. And then once you have that all lined up, you take and trim on the left and top. And again, if you're right-handed, you're probably going to be doing this the exact opposite way that I'm doing it. Then you take and rotate the piece 180 degrees. You don't turn the ruler around. And this time you're going to line up the 3.5 inch line on the right-hand side and 6.5 inch line on the bottom. Those are the most important lines now. And you get those all perfectly lined up with the edges that were just cut, and then look to see that that little crisscross triangle is in the peak of the triangle, and then trim up the left side again. And then you're also going to trim off the top again. And that way you end up with a perfectly trimmed flying geese unit. So the way I showed you with the yellow also worked, but I realized that it wasn't according to the directions that came with the wing clipper ruler. So let me show you one more time. Notice that we have the triangle pointing to the right. We have the wing clipper ruler that's drawn on the ruler at the bottom. And now we're working on the larger one, which is 4.5 by 8.5. So we make sure that the 4.5 inch line is within the fabric on the right hand side, and the 8.5 inch line is within the fabric on the bottom. And then we look for those two lines that are running along the seam and make sure that they're right on top of the seam, and that that crisscross is right in the peak of the triangle on the right hand side. And you notice that I'm not going to have a lot to trim off on that 4.5 inch side on the right. It looks like it may actually be right on the line, but that's okay as long as it's right there on the line. And then I'm going to take and trim up that left side. And then I'm also going to trim up the top. And then I rotate the piece 180 degrees, keep the ruler still going the same direction, and now line up the 4.5 inch line with that right cut side and the 8.5 inch line with the bottom cut side. Those are the two most important lines at this point. And then look to see that that little crisscross is right in the point of the triangle. That's important too. And then we're going to trim on the left side again. And we're going to trim at the top again. And then we end up with another beautiful flying geese unit. And again, when they are completed, so here's a green flying geese unit that's completed. It gets different size tan rectangles that are added on either side, and I've completed all of those. And then we have the red flying geese unit, which is larger, and it has even smaller rectangles, but all of these are getting the block to finish at a certain size. So here are those other red ones that have been completed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take and sew these together. So we put a red one on the bottom, a green one on top of it, and then a yellow one on the top. So this is how the block gets constructed. Move that up just a little bit more so you can see it. So there we go, that's how the block gets constructed, and it's real easy. We just flip this over like this, line up the pieces, and sew a 1/4 inch along there, press towards the top of the block. And so I have a block completed here. Here it is. These are such beautiful spring colors of the yellow, the green, and the red with this beautiful tan background. So one way to get the block to lay really flat is that I do snip the seams. So like if all of this was pressed up, notice how it kind of is resisting pressing there, and then it also would be resisting pressing here if I pressed it the other direction. So I make a little snip here, and a little snip there, and then a little snip here, and a little snip there, which allows this piece to go the opposite direction, which causes that block to lay nice and flat. And I've done that on each one of these. This one, it's been done as well, between the red and the green. And so here's 2 of the triangle blocks that have been completed, and I'll keep putting these together, and then I'll show you how I put the table runner together. The next thing that we're going to work on is getting our bunny pieces cut out of the panel. And you can see that I've trimmed this particular one so that there's an even amount of tan fabric around the green square. So first of all, I'm going to show you how to square up the panel. Sometimes when the fabric is put on the bolt, it ends up getting skewed and the pieces aren't exactly square. So the first thing that you want to do is check to make sure that your panel pieces are actually square. And the way I do this is put a ruler on there and look to see if there is an even amount of tan all the way around the ruler. And this particular ruler is the exact size that we're going to be cutting out the pieces. So it makes it very easy to tell if there's an equal amount of tan going around. Now, if for some reason there's not an even amount, you need to wet it and press it with your iron and reshape it to get it a little bit more square. You can also starch the fabric, which will help it keep its shape after you've blocked it and pressed it again. Now the next thing I'm going to show you is how I actually cut out the different pieces from the panel. And I'm going to start off by using a long straight edge ruler. And I want to preserve this middle ribbon fabric to make it part of my backing. So I'm basically going to cut a 1/4 inch away from those ribbon pieces, which will still leave enough fabric around the bunny squares so that they can be trimmed up to the appropriate size. So I just placed the ruler a 1/4 inch to the left of the ribbon piece and cut along that left edge of the ruler. You can see how that's preserving at least a 1/4 inch on either side of that ribbon piece so that I can use it later, and yet it's still allowing me enough fabric to trim up the bunny pieces. So then I just scooch my fabric up a little bit and flatten it out nice, and then put my straight edge ruler back on a 1/4 inch away from the ribbon pieces and continue to trim along the left side of the ruler. I happen to be left-handed, so if you are right-handed, you'd be doing everything the exact opposite of what I'm doing. But I basically just continue down the piece until I've got these pieces separated. So I have to make one more cut here. So I've got it down so that it's all on my cutting mat now. And I'm going to lay the straight edge ruler one more time, a 1/4 inch away from that ribbon piece, and then trim along the left edge. And now I have those two pieces separated from each other. Now I'm going to use a smaller ruler because I'm going to separate the individual bunny pieces from each row. So now I will lay the fabric the other direction on my cutting mat. And now there's enough space in between the blocks that I basically can put the ruler so that it is halfway in between the two blocks. So there's no precise measuring here. I'm just making sure that I'm approximately halfway in between the two bunny blocks, which is still going to leave plenty of fabric to trim up later. And it does look like I'm placing it slightly more than a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the tan fabric, because it looks like the amount that's in between those two bunny pieces is a little more than a 1/2 of an inch. So I probably have it about 3/8 of an inch out from the left edge of the tan piece, and that's where I'm trimming in between the bunny blocks. Now, in order to trim up these pieces to the size that they need to be in the table runner, I found that it is best to use a rotating mat, because that way when you lay your ruler on, that's your square up ruler, you're going to be able to trim all the way around the piece. So now we're ready to trim up our blocks. They need to be 9.5 inches, and so this is a square up ruler that is 9.5 inches. So this is a perfect ruler to use for this because it's displaying exactly what I'm going to get when I trim it up. And you'll notice that there's an even amount, or fairly even amount, of the tan going all the way around, and that's what we want. If for some reason there wasn't, you would hold the ruler in place and tug on it to get it the direction that it needs to go, and the ruler is going to kind of hold it in place, which should give you a nice square trim. So I'm going to just start by trimming on one side here. And then I'm going to rotate the mat, and this is the beauty of having a rotating mat. And carefully put your hand back on so that the ruler doesn't slide. Go like this. Go like that. And we're going to rotate again. Carefully put your hand on the mat. Cut along the next side. And then here we are on the last side. And we may have to make one more cut over here on this side. We didn't quite get this one. There we go. So now we have a bunny from the panel that's trimmed at 9.5 inches, and it's ready to go into the next block. And if these pieces aren't exactly even, it's okay, because the piece that this is going to be pairing up with is going to have some tan in it, so I think it will be okay. In order to lay the table runner out, you start with a triangle block. facing, with the triangles facing that way, then one of the bunny blocks, another triangle block facing to the left, another bunny block, then a triangle block facing to the right, a bunny block, and another triangle block facing to the right. This will then get an inner border both on the ends and the top, and then an outer border. And then in order to put together the table runners, you start out with a triangle block facing to the left, and then a bunny block, and then there is a smaller piece of inner border here and a little bit larger inner border at the top, and that's in order to get the table runner to be a certain size. And so this is what all of the table runners look like before they have the outer border put on them. So that will be the next thing, is adding the outer border, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So here is the table runner with the inner borders and outer borders added. And this is what it looks like. And this was what I was talking about, like if you end up with a little bit of unevenness in the pieces, you notice how that line goes at a little bit of an angle, and this one does as well. But from a distance, I don't think anybody would notice that, and so I don't think it's something that I would worry about. But so that is the table runner. And then here are what the placemats look like. And they have different size inner borders and outer border. And there's actually a different inner size border to get this placemat to be a certain size. And here are a couple more of the placemats. And then I'll just show you how those borders go on. So here is the placemat with the inner borders, and you can notice that the side inner borders are a little bit smaller than the top and bottom. And the sides get added first, and then the top and bottom. And so then what happens is we take and we add a side border here, and we add a side border over here. And then after we've sewn those on, we add a top border here and a top border at the bottom. And so that is how these placemats are constructed. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed following along how I made the bunny hop table runner and 4 placemats. The pattern is available on my website at www.bluebearquilts.com. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell so that you'll be notified when I make new videos. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.